The dining room smelled of rosemary and unsaid things. My mother had polished the silver candlesticks until they gleamed like accusations. My father, Martin, sat at the head of the long walnut table, carving a roasted chicken with surgical precision. Across from me, Vivienne lifted her wineglass with the casual entitlement of a woman who had never been told no. It was a celebration dinner, technically. Her promotion at the family orchard's distribution arm had come through that morning. I'd spent the afternoon walking the rows of Honeycrisp trees, tracing the bark where my grandfather carved his initials 60 years ago, and letting the quiet settle into my bones. I'd made a decision out there among the apples. A hard, clean decision I wasn't sure I had the courage to follow through on. Vivienne watched me over the rim of her glass. "You're brooding again, Mara. It ages the face." I smiled, not the reflexive, defensive smile of childhood, but something slower. "I'm just thinking." "Dangerous hobby for you." She set the glass down with a little click. "Speaking of which, the orchard's margins are still bleeding. Not that you notice now that you've abandoned ship." My mother, Eleanor, opened her mouth and closed it. She straightened her napkin. My father carved harder, the knife scraping bone. I hadn't abandoned anything. I'd stepped back from daily operations 6 months ago after discovering a discrepancy in the accounts, a series of small, clever withdrawals that no one wanted to investigate. The family had chosen comfort over curiosity, so I'd chosen distance. I spent my days now restoring a stone cottage at the edge of the property, working the land with my own hands and quietly assembling proof. The manila folder in my briefcase by the front door contained 12 pages of documentation, bank transfers, forged signatures, a loan taken out in my name that I had never authorized, racking up interest like a tumor. All of it pointed straight to the woman currently savoring her mother's roast potatoes like she hadn't been pillaging her own bloodline. I had decided, standing between the apple rows that afternoon, to give her an exit. A private, dignified window. 24 hours to confess to our parents, resign from the company, and begin making restitution. If she refused, I'd go to the bank's fraud investigators at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. The folder burned in my mind. I took a sip of water and held my peace. Vivienne didn't like the silence. She never did. She wanted a reaction, a rise, the familiar thrill of watching me crumble. When I didn't provide it, she leaned forward with theatrical concern. "Honestly, Mara, you could at least try to be happy for me, unless you'd rather still be playing bookkeeper and running the place deeper into the ground." "I'm glad the promotion makes you happy," I said evenly. "It's not about happiness, it's about competence." She gestured with her fork. "Dad, do you think we should send Mara on another yoga retreat? She looks tenser than usual." My father grunted, not looking up. Something cold and steady settled in my chest. I was going to excuse myself after dessert, retrieve the folder, and tell her privately. She could rage or weep or deny, but the clock would start ticking. That was the plan. Vivienne stood abruptly, reaching across the corner of the table for the salt cellar. Her elbow grazed my shoulder. Then she paused, looked down at me with a spark of something ancient and mean, and shoved. It wasn't a nudge. Her palm connected with the bony shelf of my shoulder and drove sideways. My chair, an antique with a hairline crack I'd noticed 3 Christmases ago, splintered. I went down hard, hips striking the floorboards, the sound of breaking wood louder than my gasp. The world tilted. My mother's hands flew to her mouth. My father half rose. Vivienne looked down at me on the floor and laughed, a bright, surprised giggle. "Your face," she said. I lay there for 3 full seconds. The ceiling was painted a soft cream. I could feel the grain of the wood floor through my stockings. Something burned clean and white-hot behind my sternum, not rage exactly, but a clarity so sharp it almost hummed. Vivienne had no idea that I had been about to hand her a life raft. I pushed myself up, ignoring the hand my father extended. The broken chair lay in 2 jagged pieces. I didn't look at Vivienne. I turned and walked out of the dining room, past the framed photographs of happier seasons, toward the front hallway where my briefcase waited. Behind me, my mother's voice, thin with embarrassment. "Vivienne, that was uncalled for." It was a joke, she's so dramatic. I opened the briefcase. The folder was cool and heavy in my hand. Part 2. My hip throbbed as I walked back into the dining room. I could feel the swelling begin, a knot of heat just below the bone. I didn't limp. I'd learned young that showing pain to Vivienne was like bleeding near a shark. It only quickened her. The room had shifted in my brief absence. My father had sat back down, carving knife abandoned on the platter. My mother was dabbing at a wine spill on the tablecloth, her movements jerky and purposeless. Vivienne had retaken her seat and was buttering a roll as if nothing had happened. The broken chair lay where I'd left it, its splintered armrest like a cry frozen mid-syllable. I set the manila folder in the center of the table next to the salt cellar. The label read Orchard Account Reconciliation, Q3 and Q4 in my own neat handwriting. Vivienne glanced at it, then at me, her mouth curving with the first hint of unease. "What's this?" "A report card." She tore a piece of bread with her fingers. "Mara, if you're going to sulk, at least do it in the other room. You're killing the mood." My father cleared his throat. "Sit down, Mara. We'll get you another chair." "I'll stand." I opened the folder. The top page was a bank statement I'd obtained after 3 weeks of polite requests and one veiled threat of legal action. Columns of numbers stretched across the paper, but the highlighted line was the one that mattered. A transfer of $48,000 from the Orchard's operating account to a shell company registered under Vivienne's maiden initials. I slid the statement across the table. It stopped just short of Vivienne's plate. She didn't touch it. "What am I looking at?" she asked, but her voice had lost its buttercream texture. 2 years of withdrawals, small enough to avoid routine audits, large enough to total just under $300,000. I pulled out the next document. "This is a loan agreement dated last March, secured against the South Orchard parcel. It bears my signature. Problem is, I was in Vermont that week attending a friend's funeral. I have the mileage logs and the guest book to prove it." My mother stopped dabbing the wine stain. The cloth bunched under her fingers. My father took the loan document. He held it at arm's length, squinting, the way he did with bills he didn't want to pay. "This is your signature, Mara." "It's a very good forgery. The loop on the A is wrong. I cross my A's at the bottom, not the middle." I produced a canceled check with my actual signature for comparison. I brought an exemplar. Vivienne laughed, a brittle sound. "This is absurd. You fall off a chair and suddenly you're an accountant detective. Dad, she's been stewing for months because I got the promotion she thought she deserved. Now she's manufacturing evidence." I didn't answer her. I looked at my father, who had taught me to graft apple trees when I was 9, who showed me how to cut the scion at an angle so the cambium layers would match and bind. He had given me the language of patience and precision. He had also spent 30 years ignoring every warning sign Vivienne planted like landmines. "The shell company is called VM Distributing," I said. "Vivienne Marie." The bank traced the IP address used to open the account to her personal laptop, logged from the Orchard office Wi-Fi. I have the forensic IT report in the back of the folder, along with time-stamped emails instructing the loan officer to rush the paperwork because my sister is traveling. I paused. She used my grief as a smokescreen, a funeral. The room sagged under the weight of it. My mother made a sound I'd never heard from her, a low, involuntary keen that might have been a word abandoned halfway. My father placed the loan document on the table with the care of a man handling something explosive. Vivienne's face underwent a rapid series of adjustments. Dismissal flickered into contempt, then something rower, darker. She opened her mouth and I saw the old machinery spinning, the deflection, the accusation, the tearful appeal to Daddy's little girl. I'd watched this routine 100 times. It had always worked before, because no one wanted to pay the price of believing me. This time, I'd already paid it. The bruised hip, the crack of breaking wood, the years of being told I was too sensitive, too rigid, too unforgiving. "You're lying," Vivienne said, but her voice was thin as onion skin. "You're a bitter, lonely woman trying to destroy me because you have nothing of your own." I reached into the folder one last time and withdrew a business card, the logo of the County Fraud Investigation Unit. On the back, in blue ink, a detective had written his direct line and the words "call anytime." "I was going to give you until tomorrow night," I said quietly. "I came here prepared to let you confess privately and begin restitution. No police, no courtroom, just a quiet resignation and a payment plan." I placed the card beside Vivienne's untouched roll. Then you shoved me off my chair and laughed. The silence that followed was not the stuff of theater. It was dense and sticky, the air inside a sealed jar. Vivienne's expression calcified into something I'd never seen on her face before, not guilt, not remorse, but the animal terror of a creature that has just recognized the bars of a cage it walked into willingly. My father's hands trembled. My mother was crying without sound, tears tracking through her powder. I gathered the documents, leaving copies on the table, and tucked the originals back into the folder. "The bank freezes the accounts tomorrow at 9, I said. "Detective Okonkwo is expecting my call by noon." I looked at Vivienne, and for the first time in my life I felt nothing. "You should call a lawyer." I walked out. The front door was heavier than I remembered, but it swung open easily. Part 3. The gravel driveway crunched under my feet, each step a small percussion in the dark. The porch light threw my shadow long and thin across the lawn. I could hear my mother's weeping through the open dining room window, a muffled and messy sound, interrupted by my father's low rumble, not words, just the cadence of a man trying to construct a wall out of noise. I didn't turn around. I was halfway to my car when the front door slammed open behind me. "Mara," Vivienne's heels clattered on the stone steps. "Mara, stop right now." I kept walking. The folder was tucked under my arm like a schoolbook. My car keys were already in my hand, the metal warm from my pocket. She caught up to me near the old sugar maple, the one with the tire swing our grandfather had hung. Her hand closed around my elbow, hard enough to leave marks. I stopped, not because of the grip, but because I wanted to see her face in the half-light. Vivienne's composure had cracked clean through. Her eye makeup was smudged, though I couldn't tell if it was from tears or the frantic rubbing of someone trying to think their way out of a box. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. She still looked beautiful, the way a storm looks beautiful from a distance. "You can't do this," she said. "It'll kill Dad. The scandal, the bank, the police, it'll destroy the orchard. Is that what you want? To torch the family legacy because I hurt your feelings?" "You didn't hurt my feelings." My voice came out even, almost conversational. "You committed fraud. You stole. You forged my name on a debt that would have cost me my cottage, my credit, and possibly my freedom. Feelings are beside the point." She released my elbow and took a step back, hugging herself. The night air was cool, scented with cut grass and the distant sweetness of ripening apples. I was going to pay it back. I needed to cover some investments. There were people I owed. "You don't understand the pressure." "I understand that you had 2 years to tell the truth. You chose to feed me to the wolves instead." Vivienne's face twisted. For a second I saw something almost genuine beneath the performance, a flash of self-recognition so ugly it made her flinch. Then it was gone, papered over by the old indignation. "You've always been so righteous, so above it all. You think you're better than me because you don't want anything. You don't want money, you don't want status, you just want to be left alone with your pruning shears and your moral superiority. That's not strength, Mara. That's hiding." I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile, but it wasn't cruel either. It was the smile of someone who had finally, truly understood that the cage door was open and had been all along. "You're right about one thing. I don't want much, but I do want to be left alone. and I do want the law to do what it's designed to do when someone commits a crime." She stared at me. The tire swing creaked behind her, nudged by a breeze. "You were really going to let me off tonight, with just a warning?" "I was going to give you a chance, 24 hours. I shifted the folder to my other arm. "I sat through that dinner knowing what you'd done. I listened to you mock my life, my choices, my face, and I was still going to hand you a door marked exit. I had the whole speech prepared. I was going to tell you that you're my sister, that I love some fossilized version of you from when we were children, and that I didn't want to see you in handcuffs. I was going to say, confess and make it right, and I'll stand beside you while you do it." Her lips parted, no sound came out. "And then you shoved me off my chair." I gestured at the broken piece of armrest still visible through my open car window, which I'd picked up on my way out. "You laughed at me on the floor, and I realized that the version of you I've been trying to save hasn't existed for decades. Maybe she never did." Tears spilled over Vivienne's lower lashes. Real ones, I thought, though with her it was hard to tell. "Please, I'll do anything, I'll sign anything, I'll leave the orchard." "You'll call a lawyer," I said. "That's what you'll do, and I'll call Detective Okonkwo in the morning." I opened my car door and slid inside, placing the folder on the passenger seat. The broken piece of chair sat next to it, a jagged little monument. Vivienne didn't move. She stood under the maple, the tire swing drifting listlessly at her shoulder, and watched me back out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. I drove home with the windows down. The folder hummed on the seat beside me, no longer a burden but a testimony. The cottage came into view around the bend, its stone walls silver in the moonlight, and I felt a deep, cellular relief. Not happiness, not yet, but the clean-edged certainty of a thing finally, irrevocably done. Part 4. The cottage kitchen smelled of linseed oil and fresh mortar. I'd been restoring the old stonework by hand, fitting river rocks into crumbling gaps, rebuilding what decades of neglect had worn away. The work was slow and quiet and demanded nothing of me except patience. I was good at patience. I'd had a lifetime of practice. I placed the folder on the kitchen table and set the broken chair armrest beside it, propped against the salt shaker like a piece of abstract sculpture. Then I made tea. Peppermint from the patch I'd planted near the garden wall. The routine was grounding. Fill the kettle, strike the match, wait for the whistle. My phone buzzed at 10:14, my mother. I let it ring, watching the screen pulse until it went dark. 2 minutes later it buzzed again. My father. Same treatment. Then a text from a number I didn't recognize, Vivienne's husband, probably, drafted into the diplomatic corps of damage control. "Please call, we need to talk about this as a family." I turned the phone face down. The family had been talking about things as a family for 34 years, and all that talk had built a beautiful soundproof room where Vivienne could do whatever she wanted while the rest of us arranged furniture around her tantrums. I wasn't interested in another interior design session. I carried my tea to the small desk by the window and opened the folder again, not because I needed to review the contents, but because I needed to remind myself that the evidence was real. Documents don't gaslight you. Spreadsheets don't tell you you're too sensitive. Numbers just sit there, blunt and honest, waiting for someone to read them. Around midnight, headlights swept across the cottage walls. A car pulled into my gravel drive. I recognized the heavy diesel rumble of my father's truck. A door opened, closed, footsteps on the path. Then a knock, 3 firm raps, the kind he used when he wanted to project authority and knew he didn't have any. I opened the door. My father stood on the threshold, still wearing his dinner shirt, the collar unbuttoned and the sleeves rolled unevenly. He looked older than he had 2 hours ago. The lines around his mouth had deepened into crevasses. "May I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked past me into the kitchen and stopped when he saw the broken chair armrest on the table. He stared at it for a long moment, his jaw working silently. "Your mother is distraught," he said. I imagine she is. She wants you to reconsider. The bank, the police, there's still time to handle this internally. Vivienne has agreed to repay the money. We'll sell the south parcel if we have to. He turned to face me. His eyes were rimmed with red. You don't have to destroy her. I leaned against the doorframe and folded my arms. I'm not destroying her. She destroyed herself. I'm just refusing to bury the wreckage. She's your sister. And I was her sister when she forged my signature on a six-figure loan. I was her sister when she blamed me for the orchard's losses to cover her tracks. I was her sister when she shoved me off a chair tonight and laughed. I nodded toward the armrest. That's what's left of the chair, Dad. I'm keeping it. It's the most honest thing she's given me in years. He flinched. My father was not a cruel man, but he was a weak one, and weakness in the face of love had made him an accomplice to every small cruelty Vivienne had ever dealt me. He'd never struck me. He never called me names. He'd simply looked away, again and again, until looking away became a kind of architecture. I failed you, he said quietly. The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. I didn't rush to comfort him. I let the silence stretch. Out in the dark, an owl called twice, then stilled. Yes, I said, you did. Mom did too. And I've spent a lot of years pretending you didn't, because pretending was easier than facing the truth that the people who were supposed to protect me chose comfort over me every single time. I pushed off the doorframe and walked to the table. But I'm done pretending. The bank freezes the accounts tomorrow. The detective gets my statement by noon. Vivienne can hire the best lawyer her stolen money can buy, and she can explain to a judge why she thought my signature was hers to borrow. My father's shoulders sagged. He lowered himself into one of my kitchen chairs, a sturdy pine piece I'd built myself, and pressed his palms flat against his thighs. She'll go to prison. Yes. Your mother may never recover. That's her choice. I sat down across from him. Grief is a choice, Dad. She can mourn the daughter she thought she had, or she can keep pretending that daughter still exists. Either way, it's not my burden to carry anymore. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I felt that he was actually seeing me. Not the difficult daughter, not the sullen bookkeeper, not the convenient scapegoat, but me. The woman who had spent 6 months quietly assembling a forensic case, while everyone assumed she was just hiding in her cottage nursing wounded pride. What do you want? He asked. Truly, what would make this right? I thought about it. The question deserved an honest answer. I want to finish restoring this cottage. I want to walk the orchard rows without dreading which family member I'll run into. I want to sleep through the night without waking up at 3 a.m. to rehearse conversations I'll never have the courage to start. I met his eyes. And I want you to stop asking me to protect the family from the consequences of its own choices. That's not my job. It never was. He nodded slowly. There were tears in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He stood, and I stood with him, and we faced each other across the table with the broken armrest between us like a relic. I'll talk to your mother, he said. All right. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame, and looked back. The woodshop in town. They sell chair spindles, if you want to fix it. I almost smiled. I know I'm not going to fix it. He left. The truck rumbled to life and the headlights swept away, leaving the cottage in darkness and quiet. I sat back down, finished my tea, and realized that my hands were entirely steady. Part 5. 6 weeks crawled by, each day a small, deliberate act of reconstruction. The orchard accounts were frozen on Monday morning at 9, exactly as I'd promised. Detective Okonkwo took my statement at 10:15, a calm, unhurried woman with ink stains on her fingers who asked precise questions and wrote everything down in a spiral-bound notebook. By Friday, Vivienne had been formally charged with 3 counts of embezzlement and 1 count of identity fraud. Her mugshot appeared on the local news website the following Monday. She looked exhausted. I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief, which is a quieter, deeper thing. The kind of feeling that settles into your bones and tells them they can finally stop bracing. The orchard's interim management fell to me, not because anyone asked me to step in, but because no one else knew the books well enough to unwind Vivienne's labyrinth of deceptions. I hadn't sought the role. I'd simply shown up at the main office the morning after the charges were filed, coffee in hand, and started sorting through the wreckage. My father watched me from the doorway for a full minute, then walked away without a word. I took that as permission. The work was grueling. The South Orchard parcel was mortgaged to the hilt, the distribution contracts were tangled with Vivienne's shell company, and the IRS had questions about 2 years of tax filings that no one wanted to answer. I hired a forensic accountant named Priya who swore like a sailor and had a gift for untangling financial knots. Together, we rebuilt the books from scratch, line by line, until the numbers finally added up to something like truth. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. Then she started leaving things on my doorstep, a jar of her plum preserves, a bundle of fresh lavender, a note that said only "I'm sorry" in handwriting so cramped it looked like a spasm. I didn't respond. The preserves were excellent. I spread them on toast and let the sweetness sit on my tongue without attaching meaning to it. The preliminary hearing was held in a county courthouse that smelled of floor wax and old paper. I wore a navy blazer and sat in the second row, behind the prosecutor's table. Vivienne walked in wearing a charcoal suit that hung too loose on her frame. She'd lost weight. Her hair, usually a glossy curtain, was pulled back in a severe ponytail that exposed the sharp bones of her face. She didn't look like a predator. She looked like a person who had bet everything on a hand full of nothing, and was just now realizing the dealer wasn't going to save her. She spotted me in the gallery. Her eyes flickered fear, fury, a desperate plea all compressed into a single glance. I held her gaze for 3 seconds, then looked away. Not because I was afraid of her, but because there was nothing left to say. The documents had spoken. The bank had spoken. Now it was the court's turn. The hearing established probable cause and set a trial date for late autumn. Vivienne's lawyer argued for reduced bail, citing family ties and community standing. The prosecutor mentioned the forged loan documents and the $300,000. Bail was set at a sum that made Vivienne's face go white. Outside the courthouse, my mother caught my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a woman who spent most of her emotional energy collapsing into furniture. "Come to Sunday dinner," she said. "Please, just the 3 of us." I looked at her hand on my sleeve. "I'm not ready." "Your father misses you, I miss you," she swallowed. "Vivienne won't be there, obviously." "I know she won't." I peeled her fingers away gently. "That's not why I'm not ready." I walked to my car and drove home to the cottage, where I spent the afternoon grouting the bathroom tile. The physical labor was a meditation. Each sweep of the trowel, each pressed line of grout, built something solid and clean where there had been only cracks and gaps. I thought about my father in my kitchen, asking what I wanted. I had told him the truth. Now I just had to live inside it. That evening, I took the broken chair armrest off the kitchen table and hung it on a nail above the front door. Not as a trophy, as a landmark. Here is where the old path ended. Here is where the new one begins. Visitors would ask about it, maybe, and I would tell them it was a reminder that some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be left exactly as they broke, so you never forget what it cost to walk away. The phone rang at sunset. Detective Okonkwo, her voice warm but professional. "Wanted to let you know, Ms. Thorensen. The forensic IT report came back from the state lab. We've got device IDs and time-stamped access logs that match your sister's laptop. The chain of evidence is solid." I thanked her and hung up. Outside my window, the apple trees were heavy with fruit, the branches bending low in the golden light. I laced up my boots and walked out into the orchard, not the family orchard, mine. The small stand of Kingston Blacks I'd planted 3 years ago along the cottage's eastern edge. They were ready for harvest. I pulled a basket from the shed and began to pick, the apples cool and firm in my palm. Each one a small, perfect weight. each one a thing I had grown from nothing but soil and patience and stubborn love. Part 6. The knock came on a Thursday afternoon in early October when the air had turned crisp and the Kingston Blacks were fermenting in the shed in barrels of pale, bubbling juice. I was up to my elbows in pulp and pumice, pressing a second batch, when I heard the rap at the front door. I wiped my hands on a rag and went to answer. Vivienne stood on my doorstep. She was out on bail, the trial was still weeks away, but she looked like a woman who had been serving time regardless. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple gray sweater and jeans that bagged at the knees. Her hair was unwashed, her face bare of makeup, and her eyes carried the bruised, hollowed-out look of someone who had stopped sleeping somewhere around midsummer. Behind her, parked crookedly in the drive, was a dented Honda I didn't recognize. The luxury sedan, I assumed, had been sold to pay legal fees. "Can I come in?" Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its old polish. I stood in the doorway and didn't move. "What do you want, Vivienne?" She shifted her weight from foot to foot. A pair of chickadees scolded each other in the maple tree. "I wanted to talk, face to face, please." I stepped aside. She walked into my cottage and stopped just past the threshold, her gaze snagging on the broken chair armrest above the door. She stared at it for a long time. I watched her watch it, and I saw something shift in her expression, a recognition, maybe, or a reckoning. Her lower lip trembled once, then stilled. "You kept it," she said. "I did." As a reminder. As a boundary marker. I walked past her into the kitchen and gestured at a chair. The pine one my father had sat in. "Sit if you want. I'm making cider." She sat. I poured 2 mugs of the previous year's batch, a dry, amber-colored liquid that tasted of autumn and patience, and set one in front of her. She wrapped her hands around the mug like it was a heat source in a blizzard. "I'm not going to ask you to drop the charges," she said. "Good. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me either. I know I haven't earned that." She took a sip of cider, swallowed with difficulty. I wanted you to know that I understand. What I did. Not just the money, I mean, all of it. The years of it." I leaned against the counter and cradled my mug. I didn't speak. I had learned, in the month since the dinner, that silence was not an absence. It was a tool. It made people fill the space with whatever truth they were most afraid of. Vivienne stared into her mug. "When we were kids, I thought being older meant I was supposed to be better than you. Smarter, stronger, more important. And when it turned out you were better at things, school, numbers, keeping your head, I didn't know what to do with that. So I made you small, every chance I got. I pushed you down because I thought if you were on the floor, I'd look taller by comparison." She laughed, a dry, splintered sound. "That's a pretty pathetic thing to build a personality around." "Yes," I agreed, "it is." She flinched but didn't retreat. "The money started as a loan I thought I could pay back. I got in over my head with some people. The kind of people who don't send polite reminders. When I couldn't pay, I borrowed more. Then I borrowed from the orchard. Then I borrowed from you without asking, because asking would have meant admitting I'd failed, and I would rather have set the whole world on fire than admit that." She set the mug down. Her hands were shaking. "When you walked back into that dining room with the folder, I knew. The second I saw your face, I knew everything was about to collapse, and I still couldn't say the words. I still tried to call you a liar." I watched her. The old anger was there, banked low like coals, but it didn't flare. It just sat there, quiet and useful, warming the room. "I don't expect you to believe me," Vivienne said. "I don't even know if I believe myself, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry I forged your name. I'm sorry I stole. I'm sorry I shoved you off that chair. I'm sorry I spent 30 years making your life smaller so mine could feel bigger." She looked up at me and her eyes were wet but steady. "I'm going to plead guilty. I told my lawyer this morning. No more delays, no more motions. I'll take whatever sentence the judge gives me and I'll serve it." That surprised me. I hadn't expected it. I had expected bargaining, deflection, one last attempt to slip the net. I searched her face for the angle, the hidden lever, and found nothing but exhaustion. "Why?" I asked. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Because it's the first honest thing I'll have done in 20 years, and because you deserved a sister who didn't make your life a war zone, and I owe you at least the truth about what I took." We sat in silence for a while, the cider slowly cooling in our mugs. Through the window, the Kingston blacks were shedding their leaves in slow golden spirals. I thought about the folder, still tucked in my desk drawer. I thought about the armrest above the door. I thought about my father, sitting in this same chair, telling me my mother might never recover, as if recovery were a destination you arrived at rather than a direction you walked in. "I don't forgive you," I said. "Not yet, maybe not ever. Forgiveness isn't something you can serve time for and automatically earn. It's not a transaction." Vivienne nodded. She looked like she'd been expecting that. "I know. But I accept your apology. I see that it cost you something to come here and say those words. I'm not going to pretend it didn't." Something fractured in her face, relief and grief tangled together. She covered her mouth with her palm and breathed raggedly for a moment. I didn't move to comfort her. That wasn't my job, but I didn't look away either. She left 20 minutes later, pausing at the door to glance up at the armrest one last time. "You should hang that in a gallery," she said. "Call it the last excuse." I almost smiled. "Go home, Vivienne." She went. The dented Honda coughed to life and disappeared down the gravel road. I stood in the doorway and watched until the dust settled. Then I went back inside, poured the cold cider down the sink and returned to my press. The pumice was starting to dry out. I added more apples and turned the crank, and the juice ran clear and sweet. Part 7. 1 year, 3 seasons, and a lifetime later, I hosted Sunday lunch. The cottage kitchen had changed since the night my father knocked on the door. The walls were freshly plastered, painted a soft buttery cream. The window over the sink looked out on a garden that had doubled in size, herbs and vegetables growing in neat raised beds I'd built from salvaged barn wood. The floorboards were sanded and sealed, the fireplace repointed. The roof replaced after a winter storm taught me the difference between a temporary patch and a permanent solution. The pine table was set for 3. A roast chicken rested on a platter in the center, next to a bowl of roasted potatoes and a salad of late autumn greens. Steam curled from the gravy boat. The chairs were new, solid oak, with reinforced joints and armrests designed to bear weight without complaint. My parents arrived at noon. My father carried a bottle of wine from a local vineyard, a peace offering wrapped in brown paper. My mother held a bouquet of dahlias from her garden, their petals the color of sunset and rust. She placed them in a vase on the windowsill without being asked, then stood back and surveyed the room with an expression I couldn't quite name. "You've made it beautiful," she said. "I've made it mine," I replied. "The beauty came along the way." We sat down to eat. The conversation was careful at first, the way it always is when you're rebuilding a bridge and testing each plank before you trust your weight to it. My father talked about the orchard, the new press I was installing, the hard cider label I was launching in the spring, the younger workers I'd hired from the agricultural college who called me Ms. Thorensen with straight faces. My mother talked about her book club and the neighbor's new puppy, and the surprisingly therapeutic effects of pulling weeds. Vivienne's name did not come up. She had pled guilty in November as promised and been sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility with a work release program. She was due for release in the spring. She had written me letters, 6 of them, spaced across the months, each one shorter than the last. I had read them all. I had not replied. That was its own kind of answer. Halfway through the meal, my mother set down her fork and looked at me across the table. The dahlias nodded in the breeze from the open window. "You seem taller," she said. I laughed. The sound surprised me, bright and unforced. "I'm the same height I've always been." "No," she said, and her voice was steadier than I'd heard it in years. "You carry yourself differently. Your shoulders, your eyes. You're not braced for impact anymore." I thought about that. Across the room, above the front door, the broken armrest still hung on its nail. I saw it every time I walked in or out. Some days it looked like an accusation. Some days it looked like an anchor. Today it just looked like a piece of wood, a thing that happened, a moment that split a timeline into before and after, a relic that had lost its power to wound. I stopped waiting for the next blow, I said. Once you stop waiting, you have a lot more energy for everything else. My father cleared his throat. He had aged visibly in the past year, more gray, deeper lines, a new hesitancy in his movements. But there was a clarity in his eyes too, something that hadn't been there during the decades of looking away. "We're proud of you," he said. "Not just the cider, the way you've handled all of it. We should have said that sooner." "You should have," I agreed. "But you're saying it now, I'll take that." He nodded, and for a moment we were just three people eating chicken in a sunlit kitchen. And the weight of the past was present but not crushing, like a familiar book on a shelf rather than a stone in your pocket. After lunch I walked them to their car. My mother hugged me tightly, the dahlias crushed between us, and whispered something I didn't quite catch. My father shook my hand, then pulled me into a brief, awkward embrace that smelled of wine and wool. They drove away, and I stood in the driveway and watched the car until it disappeared around the bend. Back inside, I cleared the table and washed the dishes. The afternoon light slanted through the window, catching the dust motes and turning them into flecks of gold. I dried my hands and walked to the desk where the folder still sat, its corners soft from handling. I hadn't looked at it in months. The documents inside were obsolete. The case was closed. The restitution was being paid, and the orchard's books were cleaner than they'd been in a decade. I opened the folder and removed the pages one by one. The bank statements, the forged loan agreement, the IP address logs, the business card from Detective Okonkwo now worn at the edges. I stacked them neatly, carried them to the fireplace, and knelt on the hearth. The match flared. I held it to the corner of the top page and watched the flame catch, orange and eager, crawling across the columns of numbers that had once held me hostage. The paper blackened and curled. The smoke rose up the chimney and out into the clean October air. I didn't burn the armrest. That stayed where it was, above the door, a geography of what I'd survived. But the documents, those I released, not because I forgave and not because I forgot, but because they had served their purpose. They were testimony, not identity. I was not what had been done to me. I was the woman who rebuilt a cottage, planted an orchard, and learned to sit at her own table without bracing for the fall. Outside, the Kingston Blacks were bare-branched and dormant, storing their strength for the spring. Inside, the fire crackled and the dishes dried on the rack, and the house smelled of roasted chicken and wood smoke. I sat down in one of my sturdy oak chairs and poured myself a glass of the new cider, crisp, bright, and entirely my own. The view from a chair that was never meant to hold me was extraordinary. I tipped my glass toward the door, toward the armrest, toward the quiet road and the apple trees and the wide, unhurried sky, and I drank to the long, slow work of becoming unbreakable. It was, by any measure, a very good Sunday.